what's the definition of sustainability? Have you ever thought that? Okay, so if I could give one particular challenge to you to be thinking about, and if I could say what is the most common question Brett Kaysen gets no matter what the audience is, what is the definition? Here's the reality, Jonathan, there is no definition. Which for us as producers that are about metrics and benchmarking and goal setting, we're like, well, there's got to be an answer. There's got to be a definition. The definition is, depending on the business that you work for, will depend on how you're going to define sustainability. So sustainability looks different for Coca-Cola than it does for Pepsi, than it does for Walmart, than it does for pig farmers. And that's okay. But I start every talk with saying that the definition that I truly like, and we'll get deeper here in a moment, is the UN's or the United Nations definition, which is to meet the needs of today's generation without sacrificing the needs of future generations. So it's to meet the needs of the present, Joyce, without sacrificing the needs of the future. I think we can all rally around that. How can't you agree with something like that? And then sustainability, again, when I talk to farmers, no matter what level, they're like, Brett, that's kind of a crazy, scary word, and I'm not quite sure what it means. The reality is, pig farmers have been doing sustainability for decades. You've been nurturing the environment forever. The difference is now is that it's actually more mainstream in the eater's eyes and in the customer's eyes than it's ever been. So let me give you a tangible example before we give it to the 4 bullets on the first slide. When I sit into some of the audiences that I connect with and I tell them that pig farmers check on their pigs every day, that Carl Link actually goes in the barn and Gary Asay goes to the barn and check on their pigs once or twice a day, they're like, seriously? We just thought they live in those barns. And no, yeah, there are people looking at pigs. To us, we're like, how could you even think about that? The reality is, this idea of that we have real people taking care of real pigs, producing something called real pork, that we're going to talk about is validating its real sustainability framework. Don't lose sight of some of the great work that we're already doing that some customers and consumers and eaters don't quite understand yet. So, why are we here today? Bullet number 1, critical conversations are happening now. I would argue, no matter what listservs you're on, no matter what you read, no matter what you click on or like, you've seen something about sustainability in the last 24 hours. And if you haven't seen something about sustainability, I guarantee you the word carbon has come up in the last 24 hours. See a lot of nodding heads. And if not, then maybe you've been sleeping for 24 hours. So it is those conversations that are happening right now. Now, the key is the eaters are asking for this information, and so customers thus are wanting to lean in and be part of the solution. So let's talk about customers, but I'm going to come from it from a pig farmer's perspective. Who do we sell our pigs to? When I ask farmers that, a lot of times they say, well, I sell them to my packer. Yeah, kind of. Well, I sell them to my processor. Well, kind of. Ultimately, you're producing a food product, and your customer is the consumer of Carl pork as a food. That's your customer. It's the eater. And so the customer has spoken and said, we want sustainable products. They don't even know what that means. They're not quite clear of what it should be, but they know it sounds cool, it sounds good, and we should lean into it. So we as producers then should take that attitude and navigate those waters for them. And finally, what I get the most excited about, and you should too, and this is what I'm challenging the producer community with. We had this conversation earlier today, right? Is saying, listen, pork is in a position to be part of the solution. So don't take, and I would challenge you young leaders in the room, don't take it as a defensive posture of something to fight. Take it as an opportunity to engage and shape the narrative. And that's where we're headed. So I want you to take a deep dive into this multicolored slide. And the power of Google is amazing, but search the United Nations 17 Sustainability Development Goals. Because what's the roadmap? The debate isn't whether you like the UN or you disregard the UN. The reality is the UN has put together a sustainable framework that's aligned on metrics and communication opportunities for anybody in any business. But what I like about these 17 is you dig in deeper, we play a role as pig farmers to help solve those. Because they're wanting to accomplish all this, John, by 2030. And you're like, oh, 2030, folks. Here we are in June of 2021. It's coming fast. However, if you look at goal number 2, zero hunger, and they want to achieve that globally, does pork play a role? Absolutely we do. We're part of the solution. If you want to talk about number 8, a decent work environment that creates economic growth, do we play a role? Absolutely we do. Oh, let's look at number 7, affordable clean energy. I can tell you, Gary Kaysen has solar panels around his pig farm. He creates clean, affordable energy. So this is the framework globally of choice. And globally, 72% of the companies are using that framework as the North Star of sustainability. So what we've done with your checkoff dollars and producer leadership is said, if we're going to build a sustainability framework for all pig farmers in the U.S., whether they're in Idaho or Colorado, we should be smart and find a way to bolt that up to the 17 UN SDGs. Because when the United Nations has their Food Systems Summit, right, Hannah, upon us, we ought to be able to have the dialogue to say, oh, by the way, pig farmers are part of the solution. So that's what we've done at the National Pork Board, and we'll dig in deeper. Some of you have seen this slide, and some of you have seen it for over a decade, but I can't help but continue to get it through you that this is the key to success. How many of you have heard of We Care? It's okay to raise your hand. All right, good. We Care. It's been around for over a decade. It's been around for 13 years. It is the 6 ethical principles in which pig farmers live by each and every day, right? I like to think of them as our values. You wake up, you care about animals, you care about the environment, you care about public health, you care about food safety, you care about your people, you care about communities, right? That's what we're about. That's strong. We were first movers in the protein business when Dallas Hockman had the vision of creating the We Care ethical principles 13 years ago. Then farm practices, we continue to evolve those, right? Every day we get better. I was just talking with Carl Link on some of the things they're doing with Cooper Farms to get better. As I came to work for you 3 years ago in the success equation here in front of you, I felt like we had a weak spot or an open flank in our industry, and that's the proof points. Validation. Okay? So We Care was based on our commitment to continuous improvement. And in 13 years dealing with big customers, 13 years ago, they say, oh, you've got a plan, you've got principles, you've got values. I trust you to do the right thing. Guess what? Now it's trust, but what? Verify. So we got to have those proof points to validate our principles. Or, excuse me, for a kid that grew up in the West, as my grandpa always said, trust everybody but brand your calves. Right? So that's trust, but verify. So that's the opportunity of where we've been, right? Historically, the practices we're currently improving, but where we're headed is the proof points. What are we ultimately trying to do? We're trying to garner public trust, or the eater's trust. That picture has value. That picture was put in there intentionally. That is somewhat of your new eater. A younger mother with a next generation on hip with a digital device in her hand. That's your new eater. Where did this come from? How was it raised? Is it good for me and my family? And is it good for the planet? Now let me validate that for you for a moment. I'm going to take you on a little bit trip from 3 weeks ago. At the checkoff on your behalf, with third-party help, we had the opportunity to bring some consumer groups together in the digital space. So they went throughout the country, they identified some folks, and we worked through 2 groups, and we're soon to work through the 3rd group. The first group identified as heavy pork users as a consumer. And our job as checkoff staff was to sit in the back of the virtual room with our cameras off. Stephanie, you'll remember this, you're part of it, on mute, right? And listen to what these heavy pork users were saying about our product that we produce. And they asked them questions in the digital space where they could type their answers in real time. And then we went out to the Zoom room breakout sessions, and they were asking these consumers, heavy pork eaters, about their experience, lots of different questions. So these people have already committed and say, I love pork, I love to eat pork, I'm going to keep eating pork. But then some of their concerns came up. But pigs are dirty. And pigs are raised in dirty conditions. And I sometimes don't feel good about that, but I love bacon. And boy, I'd sure like these pigs to be in smaller groups. And I'd like them to have more space. But I love getting around the barbecue grill on Memorial Day, right? So that was the first group. The second group we looked at was a group that self-identified themselves as flexitarians, saying, I'm a meat eater today, Tony, but I'm thinking about incorporating more of a plant-based diet moving forward. So I'm a flexitarian. Well, as you unpack that and you start to listen to them, again, actually marketing pigs is easy. Let's just make the whole pig bacon and we all win. Talk's over, go home. But they say, we love bacon, but pigs are pumped full of antibiotics and hormones, and we just don't like that part. And oh, by the way, you take those pigs, you put them in a packing plant. Those packing plants have no health regulations, no safety protocols, and that's helping gin up this global pandemic. These are flexitarians talking now. Our customers are eaters from 80 years old to 20 years old, from Indiana to a dorm room in Chicago to Long Beach, California, and I'm sitting there on mute without my camera on, taking it all in. Back-to-back nights for 3 hours. Do you know how hard it was for me not to come off mute? Can you imagine Brett Kaysen, the pig farmer, the educator, the advocate that's just, I want to climb through the camera and say it's just not true. But then I had to self-reflect and say, wait a minute, where are they getting their information? How are they getting their information? Who influences their decisions? And what role do we play as producer leaders to change that paradigm? So, let's get into goals and metrics. Now, you producers in the group, I'm not talking to anything you've never done before, because you spent your whole life benchmarking and measuring your progress and wanting to get better. But it's time to take that and ramp it up to a little bit of a different level in terms of the sustainability space. Now, let's be careful, though. We'll talk about goals. Those of you farmers in the room, and I can't help as a geneticist, that sometimes we'll get off and say, well, we're going to chase this one particular trait in the genetic code. What happens when we single trait select livestock? It usually doesn't end well. That same approach can hold true when you talk about sustainability, and we want to talk about it from a systems approach. So is antibiotic use part of sustainability? Absolutely. Hashtag One Health, right? Is animal well-being part of sustainability? Absolutely. Food safety? Absolutely. Is there a social component to sustainability? Do you think our eater wants to know how people are treated in the farms and in the plants? A lot of nodding heads. Absolutely. So that's where those We Care ethical principles come into play, right? Because we're taking a holistic approach. So you need to have goals, you have to have metrics, you have to have KPIs, but you have to be careful in this space that you don't just single in on one trait. I love this slide, and I shared this slide for this reason. Part of this game, leaders and producers, is taking credit for some things we've already done. So a lot of times when I'm working one-on-one with producers, they'll say, but Brett, this is what they want today. What will they want tomorrow, and what's it going to be like 3 years from now? I don't know that. But what I do know is we can do a better job of taking credit. So part of the taking credit is here. Dr. Jason Lusk, he presented this information 3 weeks ago, I think, on a Checkoff-funded webinar, and he said, you know, in 2030, we created 28.13 billion pounds of pigs, and we did that with of pork, and we did that with 131.6 million head. That's fantastic. If you take 90s technology and try to get the same production system, you have to add almost 30 million more market hogs to get the same amount of pork. What do we call that as producers? Efficiency. We've been talking about that since we started raising pigs, right? How do I lower my cost? How do I lower my inputs? How do I maximize my outputs? So we're producing more pounds of pork than ever with fewer pigs needed. That efficiency is sustainability. No question. But do I lead with this in every audience I talk to? Because if I just lead and say, but hey, we're more efficient than we've ever been, we're producing more with less, hence we're sustainable. What's the next question that's going to come to a non-producer? But how did you raise them? How did you get there? How did you do that? Well, we did it with innovation and we did it with technology. Tell me about that technology. What does it look like? What does that feed have in it? How much room is in that feeder? How much room is in that room? How much room is in that farrowing stall? See what I'm saying? So we've got to take credit for our production system, but we also got to be thinking about the audience we're talking about. So let's talk about data. I am very proud of Gary Asay and Carl Link and other leaders that work on your behalf as board members of the 60,000 at the Checkoff that said, back in March of 2020, that said, we want to move forward and create a sustainability framework for all U.S. pig farmers and all U.S. pork. They put that mandate to myself and the sustainability team at the National Pork Board and said, go to work. And so in June, we went to work. And we partnered with a company and a group called Ernst & Young. Some of you may know them, but Ernst & Young is known as a global reporting accounting system mainly, but they have a global initiative around agriculture and sustainability as well. Smart people. people that think different than I do. People that are actually farmers, but people that represent some of the largest consumer packaged good companies in the world. So it was hard for me at times, right? Because we all look at it through our own lens. Well, they stretched us and they said, well, here's some goals, here's what's going on in the marketplace, here's what you need to think about. And so credit to our board of directors, and we'll talk more about this in depth at the end of the talk, but what took place is they said, here's the framework, we're committed to it. Brett, let's go. That was in March. That was in March. So less than 90 days later, right, what I'm going to show you here in a moment, but basically 3 hours after the decision was made, Dr. Sarah Crawford went to work with Minnesota Pork Producers Association, Iowa Pork Producers Association, Missouri and Kansas, and said, now let's get real farm data. Let's get real farm data, let's calculate it, let's validate it, and report it back. So I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot of some of the information that we've already collected that says, you know what, these aren't models. These aren't best estimates. This is real stuff relative to sustainability. So we've done a lot of work in the last 80 days, and we look to take that to scale. The intention is not for you to be able to see the words on the right side of the page. The intention is to show that's a tangible example of what a farmer gets if they participate. And I'm going to give you a call to action here in a moment, and I'm going to do it twice. So listen in. But this particular report is from Scott Phillips' farm, 2018 data. Some of his friends are in the room, and this is being recorded, and he could watch it, and he'll validate this. When we first started working with Scott, who's on our board of directors, who I have so much respect for, he said, Brett, I don't even want to use the word sustainability. He said, I'm a steward of the land. I said, I agree, and it's the same thing. Actually, Gary, he says the word now, right? And so we started with Scott to say, Scott, if you'll lean into this, the good stuff you're doing on the farm, this is just helping tell the story and take credit for what you're doing. And we did things around manure, water, and community and others. So this is an example, just a quick snapshot for you of some of the things out of the report. Let's go back to carbon for a minute, right? And you're going to say, well, Brett, this is a pig farm, but we're talking about manure and we're talking about row crop. Well, what are the two biggest emitters of CO2 equivalent gases in the pork production system? It's the feedstuff in which a pig eats, mainly made up of what? Corn and soybeans, and the manure in which the pig produces. So as much as we want to focus in barn, and we can have an impact in barn on sustainability, we've got to collaborate with our row crop growing brethren. Some of you do all three, right? Corn, pork, soy. But also then we've got to figure out, how do we change the paradigm of this thing called manure as a resource, not a waste source? So that's why we're focusing here. So because of some of the practices of Scott Phillips and the farmers that supply the feed stuff to his farm on 1,641 acres, we prove with this tool and his data that he's reduced his carbon dioxide equivalent by 640 tons. How much is that? Think about Walmart. What's Walmart's initiative? To reduce their CO2 equivalent by a gigaton. So what I like about what I'm showing you here is Scott's got a tangible example of how his practices are impacting his farm, but I could see with the mastery of some communicators that are in the room, that's like taking 124 average passenger cars off the road for a year. That people can get their head around. So Scott's got a tool that he can talk to multiple audiences, right? Also, I had an opportunity to do a radio interview just a couple moments ago, and they said, let's talk about water. How do we keep water clean in America relative to farming? Well, it all starts with soil health, to be honest with you. It's way more complicated than that, no disrespect to the agronomists in the room, but it starts with soil health. And part of soil health is keeping the soil where it needs to be. Well, guess what? One of the best tools to do that is what? Manure. Because if we incorporate manure appropriately, it builds organic matter, holds the soil in place, holds the water in place. We don't have that runoff into our rivers and streams. Jenny, did I do okay? You're an agronomist. Okay, so the animal scientist did all right. So what we learned from Scott's report, that because of his farming practices, he saved 8,713 tons of soil, which equips to 545 dump trucks. I don't know how big the dump trucks are. Think big. Think like those big ones you see in the copper mine outside of Salt Lake City. Big dump trucks, right? He's keeping the soil where it belongs. And also, he's applying manure, he's displacing commercial fertilizer, and he's saving his operation money. Part of the point of this slide is this. Here's the take home. There's a business proposition here. Don't just look at it as I've got to collect data, I've got to store it, I've got to report it back out. There is a business proposition here. Let me take it a step further. Energy use. One of our farmers that I work with in Lamar's, Iowa, you guys may know him, Gary and Carl, he said the other day, I'm taking the fluorescent lights out of my units and I'm putting in LEDs. He said, it's amazing the money I'm saving on the meter and the kilowatt hours. I said, well, congratulations. I said, you know what else you did is you reduced your carbon footprint. What do you mean? I said, well, you're using less power, and a lot of that power is coal-based. That's a win, right? There's a business proposition there. So, the other thing that's powerful about this, an eye chart on the right, but I put that in there so you get a snapshot of what it is in terms of a full sheet, but it's the Sustainability Continuous Improvement Plan. So, these pilots that we're running, the work that we're going to continue to work on with you, and I encourage you to lean into a pilot, the farmer actually gets a plan to say, here's the credit I should take and here's the great things that I'm doing, but it also, in typical pig farmer fashion, when Scott got his report, he's like, how do I get better? I'm doing a really good job. How do I get better? Funny you should ask. Here's your skip plan. Here's some short-term goals, Scott, that you need to think about implementing on your operation and your farming operation and those that farm for you, and here's some long-term goals. And then Scott and his family can take a step back and say, but does that make business sense for me? Because putting water sensing probes may sound good as a long-term goal, but I don't know if fiscally that makes sense for me. Because the reality of sustainability is if we're not economically profitable, we're not sustainable. If we don't make money, we aren't around very long. Now, don't get nervous because it's going to be okay. Brett was talking about data, farmer data. He was showing farmer data. Scott gave me permission to show that data. And I give you total credit. I'm the same way. They told me my credit card was safe once too. Till someone in Florida ended up with it, right? So I am sensitive to the data piece relative to farmers. But understand in these pilots that we're working on, the data is yours, Gary, that he's about to go on this journey with us. And what you elect to do with it and permission who can see it or who cannot is on you. Now the ask is that if you participate in these pilot projects, what we'd love you to do is to permission that data that we could roll it up in a blinded, aggregated form, Dr. Eastwood, so we could know that it's exactly Clay's information from Texas, but that we could report against that, okay? Now, Scott Phillips, he can take that information and he can share it with his lender if he so chooses. Why would he share his sustainability report with his lending institution? Trust. And it may be an access to future capital to survive. So let me make it real for you. I had an opportunity to be on a webinar, peer group situation where it was all investment bankers from all over the world. They happened to let Brett participate. And I was in there and I was listening intently and trying to keep up with the conversation. And about 5 minutes in the conversation, they started to talk, okay, first agenda item is Ron. We're going to dig in deep and wide how you folks are making decisions on Ron. So Brett being Brett, I'm looking on the Zoom calls, who the heck is Ron? Return on nature. How many of you have heard of ROI? Every hand should go up, right? Return on investment, absolutely. I'm a steely-eyed capitalist, put me in. But I'm looking for Ron, the guy on Zoom, and they're talking about, listen, here's Ron, return on nature. I don't care how small a business you run, how big it is. If you don't have some kind of environmental sustainability governance plan, I am more or less likely to provide you dollars. That's real. That's coming to a bank near you. So Scott has that advantage, right? He uses it with his family members. He can use it with his suppliers and his customers. And guess where? Guess what? Scott's a true independent pig farmer in Missouri. One of the first places he took his report was to his packer. And say, how can my on-farm practices in barn and on field help you achieve your goal, Mr. and Mrs. Packer, to get where you want to go? Does that make sense? So there is value to that data, and you own it, and we got to protect it. Why would I ask for aggregated information, Brett Kaysen, on behalf of the checkoff? Because think about you as producers when I represent you. Who do I represent? The we. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to get really direct and candid with you. I don't represent a brand other than P-O-R-K. That's the brand that you've paid me to represent, and that's what I do with pride. Now, how you choose to leverage your own individual brands, I'm all for that, because you already know I'm a steely-eyed capitalist, right? But you're paying me to put a halo around with the team at the checkoff all of pork. And so when I sit in front of Costco, they're interested in telling me about the 60,000 plus U.S. pig farmers. They're interested in all those tons of pork that we produce. Tell me more about that, Brett. So that's what that aggregate data will help us do, to talk about and talk with consumers and customers, take credit for, show transparency, and maintain our freedom to operate and our social license. Wow, I said a lot there. I'm going to slow down for a minute. Folks, traceability and transparency is not going away. It's here to stay. One of the first eye-opening experiences I had, Bill Lucky, I went to a meeting with Jared Sutton in Atlanta, National Restaurant Association. I'm sitting up there, and the first speaker is from the Stanford Lab of Future. I'm like, Stanford Lab of Future? What is that? This guy gets up and starts talking about the new eater demands radical transparency. I'm like, what did I sign up for here, Dr. Fowler? What is radical transparency? Then he goes in and shows that's in market 3 years ago, a chip you can put on your tooth that will measure your caloric intake and monitor it to your smartwatch. In place today. He said there are folks thinking about getting these implants. They're that passionate about what their food is, what's in it, and where it comes from. And that's when I stepped back, and if I would have had hair, I'd have went like this and said, we've got to lean into this. So if you think it's just kind of a buzzword, it's not. It's real. Fundamentally, for farmers, if we don't lean into it, I question our ability to operate in the future. Because I hope each and every one of you in this room has a passion for pork, a passion for agriculture, a passion for what we want to do. And I'd like to grow the pig business in the United States, not restrict it. So I'm excited to share this a little bit hot off the presses in draft form, but I'm going to go to these aggregated results. So some of these pilots I talked to you about, some of you folks in the room are part of those, some of you are soon to be a part of. This is aggregated blinded data that we had the opportunity to look at. This information, I won't go through all of it with you, but when I can start to show up in front of a customer with this type of information in an aggregated form, not pointing out one state, one producer, and one location, this is powerful information. Clay, as we scale this, I think it could be powerful information in the international marketplace as well. Clay, what's the percentage of our market in the international space today? 25, 26, 27, 28%? Close to 30. Used to be an auctioneer. I should have went all the way up. Close to 30. This plays in Peoria, but Tokyo wants to know too, right? Because the information they're getting today is what? A lot of times from those that don't appreciate pig farmers. A lot of times that don't appreciate pork. A lot of times that it's model data that it's kind of close-ish, right? Or some of it's just plain not true and not science-based and not peer-reviewed, not fact. No one else in the protein industry today is going on the journey that we're doing where we take real farm data and say this is actually the real story. Nobody's doing it. Nobody's done it. As usual, pig farmers are leading the way. Okay? Now, that's kind of scary stuff, but here's what I said I'm going to call to action. All right? Commit it to memory. Send me emails. I do respond. Takes me 7 months. No, it doesn't. Usually I'm quicker than that, right? A little slow this week. But if you're interested in leaning in as a farmer to one of these pilot projects, send me an email. We've got several signed up this week. It's paid for on behalf of your checkoff dollars. You've already invested in this through the checkoff. And so we'd love to get you in the program and get you to scale. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the work that we're doing at the National Pork Board on your behalf. So I talked about, if you start on the left-hand side of the screen, producer pilot projects. Love to get Jonathan involved in those. We'll talk about that next week. We're going to talk about some of the goals that the producers set up. And when I walk through those goals, this is where the sophomore levels come in, Austin. When I talk about the goals that the producers built, I want you to think about that as the what. This was hard, wasn't it, Gary, when we were going through the task force? And it was really hard for me as a scientist because once we were authoring these goals, I wanted to go right as farmers and scientists do to the how. How do we do that? How can we do it? We can't do that. I wonder if it's get your intention, get your aspiration, get the what out, and then figure out the how. That's what this task force group that Dr. Sarah Crawford is leading today is doing. Okay, pig farmers, you've set a goal under the ethical principle in animal well-being. Now, how do we measure, monitor, and report our commitment to animal well-being? Get that ethical principle done. Now, go to environment. You said that you want to protect natural water bodies. How are we going to measure, monitor, and report that information? So that work's going on. I do want to highlight the work on the far right of the screen. I'm interested in the crowd. Does anybody know how to measure perfectly the greenhouse gas emission per live pound of pork produced? Please raise your hand, because I'm looking for that person. What I'm seeing is, for those of you that will watch the recorded version, I'm seeing a lot of this and a lot of chuckling, right? Exactly. Now, there are measurements out there that have done that for you. The Global Reporting Initiative, I can go through all the acronyms. And they may work for a standard accounting system, but what they don't really work for is pig farmers. Well, give us an example, Brett. Here's the example. In some of these calculations on some of this greenhouse gas information, you're getting the emissions from, whether you have a deep pit building or a lagoon, doesn't matter, you're getting that as emissions or CO2 equivalents, but what you're not getting credit for is what? Taking that manure and incorporating it back into the soils. Shouldn't you get credit for that? So here's all the emissions, but what about the credit for incorporating it? So that group is storming and norming and forming as we speak, all three at the same time, because that's just how crazy this world is. What we need, team, is to keep it very basic. We need a standard ruler to measure greenhouse gas emissions for pork producers. And today we do not have that. We don't have it. There's estimates and there's models, okay? So we're working on that as well. But I think that's best defined by those that actually do the work. Let's not have someone dictate it to us. Let's shape the narrative and build it. So here's my big vision. Are you ready? I'm going to challenge you, and I hope you feel real uncomfortable with this for a moment. But I think it's very important you get this slide. It may be the most important slide in the whole boring presentation. Think of it this way. I envision a day where we have a locker room. Think about it. This is our locker room, right? And we've got pig farmers in the room right now. They go through and they use the tool or suite of tools, their choice, to get this on-farm information, and it lives in a locker. And if Gary wants to go into that locker with a digital key and unlock that to use that information for Gary to share his story, because Gary uses cover crops, Gary does solar, Gary does all these things, he wants to share his story with his banker, his local community, whoever, he can take that information in the report and go talk to the audience he so chooses. That's powerful, right? Powerful information. May want to talk to his packer. But Gary in Illinois, there may be a bigger opportunity because other Garys start to do the same thing using the same suite of tools, benchmark against the same framework. And then Jennifer Tyree, who's the CEO of Illinois Pork, says, I've got a very important meeting at the Capitol. And they're challenging pig farms. And they're challenging pork production. And to be quite frank, they're trying to create some legislation to put a moratorium on, heaven forbid. Wouldn't it be powerful if that state executive could go into the digital key and dump that data out on behalf of the state of Illinois as a state sustainability report for pork production with real live data from real farmers producing real pigs that produce real pork that's real sustainable? Wouldn't that be cool? We can do that. But let's take it a step further, okay? Some of you heard this yesterday, but I have a very important meeting tonight with a very important customer of yours that runs a very large quick service restaurant. And they have a very long agenda for tonight's dinner, and they're asking me some very important questions. I would love to be able to, within an hour, go into the locker room with my digital key and access all this information on your behalf, blinded and aggregated and protected, and walk into that meeting and say, did you know here's where we're at on antibiotic use? Did you know this is where we're at on water use? Did you know this is how much manure we applied? Did you know this is how much carbon we sequestered? Did you know this is how many people are certified in PQA? Did you know? See that in a report with factual data. Not estimates, not modeled, real stuff. Does that make sense to you? That's the vision. Now the caution or the challenge is this for the checkoff and for you, and I'm going to be very candid. The National Pork Board and the checkoff cannot make producers do anything at any time, and I like that. That was written in the 1985 Pork Act and Order, brilliant group of leaders. I like that. Now the stumbling block then is what? If we can't make anybody do anything, this would be what? Voluntary, right? And so if you build it, we're here in Iowa. Will they come? That's up to you as leaders. You will decide that. And to be quite frank and honest, for you producer leaders in the room, it keeps me up at night. I'd say I lost my hair over it, right? But you know better. It keeps me up at night. Because what happens is this thing continues to move, and this becomes more of a hot topic if we aren't ready, willing, and able to lean into it. There's risk. There's concern. I get it, right? But all the checkoff can do is build the roadmap and the framework, which we've done, and then you participate. Why would the checkoff do this? Why are we in this role? And Todd Rodebach can confirm this every time we meet with the producer. I ask him at the end, are we on the right path? Is this the work the checkoff should be leading? Should we be engaged in this space? If not, tell us to stop. We've got a lot of work to do. And yet, Todd, we've not had one say, stop. And here's why. It's these 3 points. Are there brands, are there farmers that already have their sustainability reports out there? Absolutely. They already have their sustainability goals built. Absolutely. Some of them are in this room. Fantastic work. You are a first mover leader. I applaud you for it. But the framework we've built works for anybody if you have 2 or 3 sows, to John Hines that has 27 sows, to someone that has 1 million sows. Different production systems, right? But what we're building here and what we've built for you and ask you to participate is this is producer-led. Some of the goals I'm going to get into here in a moment were built by farmers. Built by farmers, so this is what we'll do. It creates one unified voice, because really this all comes down to trust and confidence in U.S. pork, here and abroad. And again, remember, we're doing this and we're going through this process because I, as a pig farmer, you know my favorite times are? Being in the barn with pigs. Sorry to my team, they know this. Once in a while my cell phone gets left on the kitchen table and I go into that hog barn and I don't want to talk to anybody but my kids and my pigs. And I love that part. But I also got to step into, I know we love raising pigs, but we've also got to be committed to stretching ourselves so we can keep doing it. Validating those proof points. So what are the goals? I could spend 3 hours and walk you through. I'm just going to give you a highlight. So think about We Care now. We're going to shift and go pretty tight here as we get close to questions. We're going to shift gears. So one of the ethical principles of We Care is animal well-being. The producers have decided this is what we think about animal well-being. We are committed to the highest level of care and well-being for the pigs we raise. Is that impactful? Jonathan's sitting there saying, listen, I do this every day, Brett. That's just what I do. Thank you for that, Jonathan. But when I work with some of your biggest customers, that's an impactful statement. But what's the next question? Prove that you're committed to that statement, right? And so one of the commitments that we've written here, and we'll talk about the how at another time, but is we are committed to an end-to-end certification program that is transparent and utilizes PQA, TQA, site assessment, common swine industry audit. I'm going to run those off real quick. What is part of this game? Take credit for what you've already done, right? If we can measure with a high degree of accuracy how many of all the pig farmers in the United States are actually PQA certified, do you think that's powerful information? To us, we sit in the room and say, Brett, that's what we've done forever. That's what we do. That's who we are. But if I can go into a big customer and say 99% of the 60,000 plus pig farmers in the United States are certified, that's powerful. You with me, Lee? It's powerful. Let me give you a tangible example why. Won't give the name because we're in a recorded session. I had the opportunity to work with a large retailer in the East Coast. Dr. Fowler, you went with me. And we had a heck of a conversation, and it was pretty clear, I'll make the conversation concise, that we were asked to come in to help this particular retailer and this individual form what would be an pork animal welfare program for their brand. Fair? Great opportunity. Dr. Fowler and I were happy to be in the meeting. I'm glad they asked. But what happened was when we started to get into PQA, TQA, site assessment, and common swine industry audit, he leaned back in his chair and said, you've already got a lot of this figured out. Yes, we do. And we'd like you to lean in and be part of it. You with me? Okay, so part of it's taking credit. So that's a goal. Food safety. This one's a little tougher. Now this is where I hope you start to think about the how. I want you to challenge this one. The how. By 2030, 100% of fresh pork products can be traced to suppliers using technology that allows consumers to easily access information on how pork was raised and produced. You should be thinking, this is what I thought when the farmers built the goal. Does that count ground product too? How are we going to do that? Because we mix it and we batch it. Right away you go into the how. We don't know all that. We're figuring that out as we go. But we've done our homework and we're going to be moving forward. And I can tell you, folks, this is not too aspirational because there's other countries in the world that are doing this today. And I can show you that. And we plan a global marketplace, we might as well lean into it. Now, those of you that have been in Japan, there are places you can go in Tokyo and you can scan the code on the pork chop and up comes the farmer's face. That's there today. Saw it 3 years ago. Coming to a grocery store near you in the United States of America. It's coming, right? So we need to lean into that. How we do all that stuff, that's why we've got Dr. Crawford and that working group. They're figuring that out as we go, right? Water quality, we're going to improve the quality of water and we're going to safeguard and nurture our natural resources for now and future generations, right? So look at that wow statement. We are committed to safeguarding and nurturing natural resources for now and future generations. Does that sound a little like it would bolt up in the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals and the definition of sustainability? Yes, that's by design. How are we going to take care of water quality? We already talked about it, right? Let's incorporate manure. Let's keep soil where it belongs. Human nutrition. Now this one's a little harder. Public health is human nutrition. Zero hunger around the world. UN SDGs. This one's not built out as much in all transparency. We're still trying to figure this out. What I'm going to tell you is we got a huge opportunity. It's knocking. There's calories and then there's nutrient-dense calories that are actually good for you and good for your family. Guess what we do? We produce that every day as pig farmers. What we've not done well yet is to leverage that as a health and wellness play. But what are we hearing all the things out there about pork? It's not good for me. It's not good for my family. If you eat meat, it'll cause what? Cancer, cardiovascular disease. It'll kill you. You're hearing da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But what we need to do is really work on the research and science that refutes that stuff, right? So that's a component of the work that we're doing. But if you walk up to anybody in any audience at any time in the world and said, hello, I'm a pig farmer. I'm committed to producing the highest quality food possible while increasing the enjoyment of pork and the health and well-being of people around the world. How do you argue with that? Would someone in their right mind argue with that? Your premise. Yeah, they will. They'll argue with it. Hannah deals with it every day. Because then what are they going to say? Well, you say that, but what?
Well, they're not in their right mind.
They're not in their right mind. But we've got to prove it. We've got to come back and not just all do the science thing, but science in the sound bites to prove something, right? We know this. We've got to do that. But here's the social piece to sustainability. It's one of my favorite things to do with our interns at the National Pork Board. Go to the whiteboard and draw the 3 circles of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social. What I'm so proud of pig farmers is you are fantastic people. I'm sorry, no disrespect to those of you in the room, my favorite people are pig people. My wife was mad at me last week on vacation in the Dominican Republic, and what am I doing? I'm talking about pig people and pork. I can't help it. She's like, just enjoy the palm tree. No! These people in Miami want to know about pork. Let's talk about it, right? But you folks support lots of different things, right? And talk to a pig farmer here at Expo. They're not just a pig farmer. What do they do? One of our board members, I said, when are you leaving? I'm leaving tonight because I've got a school board meeting in the morning, right? And you also take care of your people on your farms. Go to Scott Phillips' farm. Look at his 22 employees that work for him. And you'll see a magical thing. Go to Cooper Farms in Ohio. And go through their turkey barns and go through their pig barns, and you will see, and go through their processing plants. I had that opportunity. You will see a magical thing of how those people love working for Cooper Farms and others. It goes on and on and on. In our communities, okay? Part of this we've got to take credit for. Now this is something I'm going to challenge you with, and we'll move into Q&A. And some of you may say, Brett, I don't believe you, and that's okay. We have a really big opportunity here on our communities. There is a population in this country, there are customers in this country and abroad that still believe in small town Main Street USA. And they actually want to protect that. What do pig farmers do? We do that, don't we? We're proud of where we come from. We want to protect that way of life. And now more than ever since COVID, rural communities are key for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to give you a tangible example. Take you back to the Dominican Republic last week. You can't be on vacation. You got to be talking about pigs and pork, right? 20-plus something young lady asked me, what do you do? Where are you from? I said, well, I'm a pig farmer from Iowa. Wish I would have had my pen. I'd have had an autograph opportunity. But what we talked about is, when we talk about where are you from, what do you do? She said, Iowa. Never been there. But it sounds like a peaceful, authentic lifestyle. Whoa. There's nodding heads in the room. A 20-something-year-old from Miami. A peaceful, authentic lifestyle. You could see the glimmer in her eyes, Bill Lucky, that said, there's something good about that. We should celebrate that. We have an opportunity to rally around that, protect it, and report about it. You with me? That's a huge social component to what we do. And so, to sum this all up, what does all this mean? I'm going to challenge us one more time. We as pig farmers, the reason I like pig farmers, you've been progressive, you're aggressive, you're agile, you're nimble, and you challenge the norm. Not everybody does that. Some of us as commodity groups can't even get out of our own way. Frustrating sometimes. You're not that way. We have an opportunity, team, and I want you to challenge your cohorts, is we can be part of the solution and step into this thing and shape the narrative. Or we can sit back, see what happens, and let the train come by the track. I'm not a fortune teller, but the train's coming, and the light's getting brighter in this space. And whether we're on the track in front of the train or on the side, or if we're going to jump on the train and roll with it or defend where the tracks are going, that's our opportunity. And I think if we just hold still and do nothing, Gary, we miss for sure. So again, if you're interested in those pilot projects, I'd encourage you to engage with the Pork Board staff here at the World Pork Expo. And this last slide is not just a placeholder. Words matter. Your board of directors at your checkoff that you fund have set a vision for the checkoff, and here's what they've said. We are driven to meet consumers' expectations, guided by producers. That's their vision. We are driven to meet consumers' expectations, guided by producers. That's a heavy lift. Will we always agree as pig farmers what our consumers want? No. But that's the eater, that's the customer, and we need to stay focused on them and use the great leadership of our board of directors and the checkoff staff to make sure it's producer-led and not dictated.